Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulale. The headlines. UN Chief Antonio Guterres demands international access to nuclear power plant after Ukraine and Russia trade accusations over its shelling. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rules out talks if Russia holds referenda in areas of Ukraine it occupies. And a total of 10 ships carrying corn and soybeans have now left the Black Sea ports in Ukraine as of this morning, raising hopes about the success of the grain deal. We begin this morning with more from the shelling on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that occurred over the weekend, as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has now called for international inspectors to be given access to the energy plant. He was speaking at a news conference in Tokyo, Japan, 2 days after he visited Hiroshima to commemorate victims of the 1945 atomic bombing. Earlier, the IAEA chief, Rafael Mariano Grossi, had warned that the latest attack underlines the very real risk of a nuclear disaster. Mr. Guterres also urged countries with nuclear weapons to stick to their no first-use commitment of atomic arsenals, warning that the nuclear arms race was returning amidst growing international tension.
This is the moment when the risk of a nuclear confrontation is back, something that we have forgotten for decades. This is the moment, as I said, to ask the nuclear-armed countries to commit to the principle of non-first use and to commit to not use and not threaten, as I mentioned, non-nuclear-armed countries with full transparency in relation to their arsenals. Any attack to a nuclear plant is a suicidal thing, and I hope that those attacks will end. And at the same time, I hope that the IAEA will be able to have access to the plant and to exercise its mandate competencies. The denuclearization, full denuclearization, verifiable and irreversible of the Korean Peninsula remains a major objective, together with the success of the JCPOA, to avoid the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We are moving backwards in relation to disarmament. We have now 13,000 nuclear bombs in the world, and we are seeing huge investments in modernizing nuclear arsenals. So this is the moment to say, stop it. That the billions that are being used in this arms race need to be used fighting climate change, fighting poverty, addressing the needs of the international community.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that if Russia proceeded with referenda in occupied areas of his country on joining Russia, there could be no talks with Ukraine or its international allies. Russian forces and their separatist allies now hold large swathes of territory in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region and in southern areas after launching what the Kremlin calls a special military operation into its neighbors' territory. Officials in both countries have raised the possibility of holding such a referenda. In his nightly video address, Mr. Zelensky said Kiev was holding fast to its position of yielding no territory to Russia. Mr. Zelensky also reacted to the shelling at the Zaporizhzhia power plant, which he called a Russian nuclear terror that warranted more international sanctions, this time on Moscow's nuclear sector.
The position of our state remains the same as it was before. We will not give anything of ours. And when the occupiers follow the path of these pseudo-referendums, they will close for themselves any possibility of negotiations with Ukraine and the free world. With this, which the Russian side will definitely need at a certain moment. I spoke with the President of the European Council, informed him about the situation on the battlefield, about the threats that Russia created by striking the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There is no such nation in the world that could feel safe when a terrorist state fires at a nuclear plant. God forbid something irreparable happens, and no one will stop the wind that will spread the radioactive contamination. Therefore, a principled response of the international community to these Russian attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, is needed now. The situation in Donbass remains very difficult. Our army is doing everything possible to stop the Russian terror and inflict the greatest possible losses on the occupiers. Avdiivka, Pisky, Mayinka, Bakhmut, and other hot areas in the Donetsk region take the main efforts and, unfortunately, many lives. It is also difficult in the Kharkiv region in the south of our country, where the occupiers are trying to concentrate their forces. As before, Ukraine will do everything to make our struggle and Ukrainian needs known in all countries of the world and in all audiences, even those who usually do not follow political life.
Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov says its military forces have attacked and destroyed an arsenal storing 45,000 tons of ammunition supplied by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in the southern Ukrainian region of Mykolaiv. Mr. Konashenkov said the Russian army also conducted strikes on multiple Ukrainian targets in Donetsk, including command posts, artillery battalions, and warehouses. He also said a total of 263 aircraft, 4,262 tanks and other armored combat vehicles, 3,273 field artillery, and 4,756 units of special military vehicles have been destroyed since the beginning of the special military operation. Earlier, Ukraine and Russia, as we've been reporting, have been exchanging accusations over a fresh strike on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. 2 more ships carrying corn and soybeans have departed from Ukrainian Black Sea ports, taking the total to 10 since the first ship sailed last week. The Sakura, which departed from Yuzhny, is carrying 11,000 tons of soybeans to Italy, Turkey's defense ministry said, while the Arizona, which left Chornomorsk, is carrying 48,458 tons of corn to Iskenderun in southern Turkey. The resumption of grain exports is being overseen by a joint coordination center in Istanbul, where Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish, and UN personnel are working. Earlier, the JCC said it had authorized the departure of a total of 5 new vessels through the Black Sea corridor, 4 vessels outbound from Chornomorsk and Odessa, carrying 161,084 metric tons of foodstuff, and 1 inbound. The ships which have left Ukrainian ports included Glory, with a cargo of 66,000 tons of corn bound for Istanbul, and River Wind, loaded with 44,000 tons of corn, heading for Turkey's Iskenderun. He said the other 2 vessels have left Ukraine, and these are the Star Helena with a cargo of 45,000 tons of meal with the destination of China, and Mustafa Nakati carrying 6,000 tons of sunflower oil and heading for Italy. And still talking about ships, one carrying 12,000 tons of corn from Ukraine was inspected earlier on by officials of the JCC ahead of docking at a Turkish port. The Turkish-flagged ship Polonet set off from Chornomorsk for the Turkish Black Sea port of Derins. The ship is expected to unload its cargo at that port today. The United Nations and Turkey brokered an agreement between Ukraine and Russia last month after warnings that the halt in grain shipments caused by the conflict could lead to severe food shortages and even outbreaks of famine in parts of the world. And now to other news. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in South Africa at the start of a 3-nation African tour aimed at countering Russia's efforts to boost its influence. Last month, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited 4 African countries as he tried to gain support for the war in Ukraine. South Africa has remained neutral in this war, refusing to join Western calls to condemn Moscow. Mr. Blinken is expected to announce a new strategy for Africa to boost American influence on the continent amidst concerns that Washington is losing out to both China and Russia. After Pretoria, Mr. Blinken will visit the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Before his trip to South Africa, Mr. Blinken also visited the Philippines, where he assured that the United States would come to its defense if it was attacked in the South China Sea, seeking to allay concerns about the extent of the U.S. commitment to a mutual defense treaty. In meetings in Manila dominated by discussions on the simmering U.S.-China tensions over the Taiwan visit of U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Mr. Blinken said a 70-year-old defense pact with the Philippines was, quote, ironclad. Mr. Blinken was the most senior U.S. official to meet new President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the late strongman who Washington helped to flee into exile in Hawaii during the 1986 People Power Uprising that ended his two-decade rule. Mr. Marcos Jr., meeting Blinken at the presidential palace in Manila, said the current geopolitical environment showed how important their ties were, and U.S. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit highlighted how volatile the region was. Mr. Marcos also brought up the conflict in Ukraine, saying events there were of significant importance despite the large geographical distance. The Philippines is a fulcrum of geopolitical rivalry between U.S. and China, and Mr. Marcos faces a tricky challenge in balancing ties between the two major powers.
Obviously, the events in Ukraine have been of significant importance to, surprisingly, even countries like the Philippines, which we would imagine is very far away. So, again, this just points to the fact of the importance of the relationship between the United States and the Philippines.
Our relationship is quite extraordinary because it is really founded in friendship. It's forged as well in partnership, and it's strengthened by the fact that it's an alliance as well. To your point, the people-to-people ties between us are almost unique, and it's something that we tremendously value in the United States, just as I know you do here. But we're also working together as partners in so many different areas, particularly economically. And of course, the alliance is strong and I believe can grow even stronger. We're committed to the Mutual Defense Treaty. We're committed to working with you on shared challenges.
And the United States is to take part in a joint military exercise with India, less than 100 kilometers from the South Asian country's disputed border with China. The military drills will be held in mid-October at an altitude of 16,000 feet in Orly, the Indian state of Uttarakhand, and will focus on high-altitude warfare training, according to a senior Indian Army officer with knowledge on the matter. Orly is about 95 kilometers from the line of actual control, an inhospitable piece of land where the disputed border between India and China is roughly demarcated. The drills will take place as part of the 18th edition of an annual joint exercise known as a war practice. Relations between India and China have been strained since a bloody clash between their soldiers in the Himalayas in June of 2020 left at least 20 Indian troops and 4 Chinese soldiers dead. Tensions have also been raised further by China building a bridge across the Pangong Tso Lake that sits along the border, a move condemned by the Indian government as an illegal occupation. Let's talk now to Oleksiy Haran, professor of comparative politics, University of Kiev Mohyla Academy, who joins us virtually from the Ukrainian capital. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. I hope it will be peaceful. Unfortunately, all the Ukraine is bombarded. Ukraine is not safe. That's a pity, yeah.
Well, we also hope that it is safe, but of course, we would allow you to go take shelter if it comes to that. So please just let us know. But in the meantime, let's kick off. It does look, as you just pointed out, that there's now a lot of distraction from what is going on in Ukraine. There's what's happening in China, Taiwan. There's what's now happening, expected to happen, China, India. There is the U.S. coming to Africa and going to the Philippines to strengthen ties. Do you fear that the war in Ukraine might take a backseat to all these other international events happening simultaneously?
Well, look, the war in Ukraine definitely has global consequences. We know the problems with food, with the problems with energy. The prices are rising. Ukrainian ports where we export our grain were blocked by Russia for 4 months. And you have already mentioned in your programs that it creates a possibility of huge famine in the whole world. Around 40 million of people may starve because of that. Regarding other places, you know, everybody is making his own conclusions. What is the conclusion from what happened in Ukraine? That you are not safe when you have a dictatorship power over your borders, which is saying that they are going to destroy you. That was the case with Ukraine. And we want actually the West that it was necessary to implement sanctions to supply Ukraine with necessary ammunition since 2014, because the war started in 2014. Russians started the war at that time. If it were done before, then maybe there would be no this large-scale war, which happened after February 24th. But it happened. And slowly but gradually, we are receiving support from the world. And by the way, I would like to thank Nigeria, because Nigeria voted in the United Nations for a resolution which condemns Russian aggression against Ukraine. We do appreciate it, because not all Africa countries voted for that. Actually, Africa was split. Part supported the resolution condemning Russia, the other part abstained. And only one state, which is Eritrea, supported Russia. So it's very important to explain to African countries what's going on the ground and who is guilty for the shortage of grain. That's why it's very important that South African position. It's also important to actually counteract against Russian propaganda, which is very active in Africa. In Africa, they are trying to exploit anti-Western sentiments because of colonialism in the past. Yes, there was a colonialism in the past. That's right. And definitely the West shares responsibility, historic responsibility for that. But what now Russia is doing, actually Russia is repeating the policy of the Russian Empire, which neglected the very existence of Ukrainian nation. So they're saying there's no Ukraine, there are no Ukrainians. I'm sitting with you deliberately in Ukrainian national shirt, which sometimes resembles what you have in Africa, your national costumes. But Putin is saying there are no Ukrainians as separate nation. Ukrainians and Russians are the same people, and he is repeating it for decades. That's why it's so important to explain it to the third world countries what Russian aggression means. And by the way, I would like to stress, because it's also very important for it may resemble Africa. In Ukraine, we have different languages for communication. We have Ukrainian and Russian language. But what is important, that we have Ukrainian political nation. And Putin tried to make a divide between Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers. But in Ukraine, in reality, it doesn't matter. I speak both languages. A lot of Ukrainians speak both languages. And what is really important, that it doesn't matter in Ukraine what is your ethnicity, what is your confession, and what is the language which you speak. The main thing is, do you consider Ukraine as your motherland and you are going to support and defend it? And overwhelming majorities of Ukrainians, 90%, are saying, yes, this is our motherland and we are going to defend Ukraine. So Putin miscalculated totally. Unfortunately, there are massive distractions in Ukraine. So the time is really, really tough for us. And that's why, as I have said at the very beginning, we are really appreciating all the kinds of support which is coming to Ukraine, because it's not only about military, it's about also humanitarian support. We have 20 million, more than 20 million displaced persons. It's 1/3 of the country's population. We are smaller countries than Nigeria. We have only 35 million. So it's 1/3 of the population which is displaced. So we need this support. And again, we need also symbolic support at the diplomatic level. So again, I'm very thankful for Nigeria. I'm very thankful to your program, which on everyday basis, as far as I understand, explains what's going on in Ukraine fighting for its freedom.
Indeed, and we hope that that fight is successful and that you are able to stay safe. Thank you so much for joining us, Oleksiy Haran, and please stay safe. We will get back with you sometime soon, not too far away. But thank you for this morning.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be on your program.
Thank you. After the break, Russian President Vladimir Putin bans oil companies, banks, and others from exiting his country till the year's end. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. China says it is carrying out new military exercises in the Yellow and Bohai Seas after a barrage of drills that encircled Taiwan in recent days. The initial exercises were triggered by Beijing's fury at a visit to Taipei by the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Taiwan has accused China of practicing for an invasion of the island, which Beijing sees as its own. Yesterday, a senior Chinese military analyst said China would now conduct, quote, regular military drills near Taiwan. China sees Taiwan as a breakaway province that will eventually be under its control. But Taiwan is a self-ruled island that sees itself as distinct from the mainland. Any hint of recognition of this by world leaders, however, enrages China. Taiwan's transport ministry said most of its airline and sailing routes could gradually resume as of midday. But it added that it would continue to direct flights away from one of the drill zones until later on this morning. Earlier on, Chinese forces took part in drills focused on land attacks and long-range airstrikes around Taiwan on what was expected to be the final day of extensive exercises rolled out in response to a visit to the island by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The Eastern Theater Command of the Chinese military said that it conducted live-fire drills in the waters and airspace around Taiwan as planned. The exercises, planned to take place in 6 zones around the island, had begun on Thursday and were scheduled to last until yesterday. Taiwan's defense ministry said that as of 5 p.m. yesterday, 66 Chinese warplanes and 14 Chinese vessels were detected operating around the Taiwan Strait. Amongst the 22 jets entering the airspace around Taiwan, 12 crossed the median line, according to the statement. The ministry previously called the drills a simulated attack against the main island of Taiwan and Taiwan's naval vessels, a slight dial-up of language from Saturday when it said that Chinese military drills around the island could be a possible simulated attack. Swedish instructors will train Ukrainian civilians in the UK to prepare them for service in Kiev's military, according to the Nordic nations' Ministry of Defense. With the British hoping to prepare 10,000 Ukrainians for combat, the announcement suggests that Kiev's conventional forces are being depleted. The Swedish armed forces will send up to 120 instructors to the United Kingdom between August 12 and December the 31st. The instructors will conduct a basic military training for Ukrainian citizens divided into several training courses. The training program was announced by Britain last month, while Downing Street said that courses would train and drill the armed forces of Ukraine using a battle-proven British Army experience. Those trained are all fresh recruits. Sweden's statement said those trained would be given basic military training to enable them to serve in Ukraine's armed forces. The aim is to make it possible for Ukraine to maintain and strengthen its defense capabilities. The existence of the training program suggests that Ukraine is in urgent need of manpower. While Kiev does not publish casualty figures, Mikhail Podolyak, an aide to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, said in June that Ukraine was losing between 100 and 200 soldiers per day, not counting those wounded. Around the same time, Ukrainian President Zelensky said that 60 to 100 Ukrainian soldiers were being killed in Donbass on a daily basis, with around 500 being injured. And Ukraine's chief war crimes prosecutor says the country is investigating almost 26,000 suspected war criminals cases which were committed since Russia's February 24th invasion, and has charged 135 people. Yuri Bilasov, head of the War Crimes Department of the Prosecutor General's office, said in an interview in Kiev that of those charged, around 15 are in Ukrainian custody and the remaining 120 are at large, adding that 13 cases have been submitted to courts and 7 verdicts have been issued.
This almost 26,000, and we have 135 charged. The person we already charged them. It's like a preliminary, not it's a case sent to the court, but we officially charged them. Out of this 135, 15 are here. It means that 120 not in Ukraine. That's in absentia. Yeah, it's just to compare.
And Russia's President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan have agreed to boost cooperation in the transport, agriculture, finance, and construction industries. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak told reporters that the two leaders also agreed to switch part of the payments for Russian gas to rubles. In a statement, Mr. Putin and Erdogan stressed the need for the full implementation of the Istanbul Agreement, including the unimpeded export of Russia's grain, fertilizer, and raw materials for their production. Turkey mediated a deal signed by Ukraine, Russia, and the United Nations in Istanbul last month, under which grain exports from Ukraine's Black Sea ports resumed after months of being blocked. And Russia has banned investors from so-called unfriendly countries from selling shares in key energy projects and banks until the end of the year, stepping up pressure in the sanctions standoff with the West. Western countries and allies, including Japan, have piled financial restrictions on Russia since it sent troops into Ukraine in late February. Moscow retaliated with obstacles for Western businesses and their allies leaving Russia, and in some cases seized their assets. The decree signed by President Vladimir Putin and published over the weekend immediately bans investors from countries which supported sanctions on Russia from selling their assets in production sharing agreements, banks, strategic entities, companies producing energy equipment, as well as in other projects from oil and gas production to coal and nickel. Mr. Putin could issue a special waiver in certain cases for the deals to go ahead, according to the decree, and the government and the central bank should prepare a list of banks for the Kremlin's approval. The decree mentioned no investors by name. Let's talk to Ini John Mekwa to bring out some of the details of these and other stories breaking up. This agreement, welcome, Minnie.
Thank you, good morning.
The agreement between the Turks and the Russians, is this a game changer, do you think?
Well, from what I've read and some of the comments, it seems it's one gray area that even the Western countries want to turn a black eye to, at least for now. We know that already the world is already encumbered with all the consequences of the sanctions, the energy costs, the transport costs, and all of that. And we do know the role that Turkey has played in this grain agreement, and it's like a middle ground. Even before the grain agreement, Turkey has been trying to intervene, even though they had the problem, you know, because they tried to stop some of those countries that wanted to join NATO and all of that. But it does seem like for now, perhaps the European countries and the Western world, they just want to, let's deal with what we have on our hands first, you know, because already we do hear that some of those yachts we talked about, the oligarchs' yachts, they've been seen in Turkish waters.
And nobody has attempted to move after them.
Exactly, yeah, nobody has attempted to go after them. And then I think like the Minister of Defense has told those guys they can come and invest, the Russian, they can come and invest in Turkey and all of that. And it's out there, and we are not getting reactions, you know, to all of that. So maybe the Western world is like, let's not bite more than we can chew. Let's deal with what we have now, and then maybe later we can come after Turkey. I do know that there was supposed to be a defense contract that the U.S. suspended, you know, as a form of sanction, you know, because Turkey helped Russia to get some of those jets and things like that, you know. But it looks like for now, I mean, Germany is dealing with a recession coming, energy costs. UK might get into recession very, very, very soon. The US the recession seems to be postponed, but the economy is not looking any better, you know. Even Turkey themselves, their inflation is about 79%, you know. So it's very hard everywhere. Countries are trying to survive, keep their citizens alive, keep the economy running, especially because energy cost is very much involved in this, you know. So it does seem like they want to turn, at least let's look away for a bit and deal with some very harsh realities that we are facing at the time.
We've just reported as well that there's been a ban on exiting Russia by some strategic companies, which the government thinks that those imposing sanctions may go after next. So they're trying to preempt that move. Yeah,
well, you know, like I think Royal Dutch Shell, they've been planning to leave Russia, you know, to totally exits the country because, of course, apart from the difficulty of supply disruption because of the sanctions and all of that, they also want to show solidarity that we are not supporting the war, you know. But now there's a decree in Russia that they can't leave until the end of the year, you know. And I think there was even a decree earlier that they have like where they used to operate the projects, that they have to move their shares into another project. You know the way Russia left Gazprom. You know they had Gazprom with Germany, and then they just took their share and told Germany, "You take care of this one. We dash you. We don't want it anymore."
We don't want it anymore.
Exactly. So they have like a new entity, a new project that would allow them to control it totally. So you have some of those companies, those oil companies, especially Royal Dutch Shell, that operates there, that they have to move their entity, their shares into that project, and then they cannot leave until the end of the year. Banks, because we do know, of course, what it's been doing to the economy. They might be very good and strategic in the buffering of the sanctions and the impacts, but the effects are still there. The government of Russia is having to do a whole lot more to keep the economy running and keep the figures looking nice, keep the ruble looking nice and all of that. So, I mean, if these companies, major companies, especially the oil companies and the banks that are still contributing to the economy and revenue of that country, if they leave now, of course, it will have a whole lot of effect. So, I mean, smartly as usual, they have not been compelled. They can't leave until the end of the year, and who knows what will happen at the end of the year.
Now, let's look at another country that has been strategic in all of this, and we've been reporting about it. India has been buying a great deal of Russian oil. India, of course, big country, They haven't
big
criticized.
population,
big population,
a lot of people to feed.
Now, they seem also to have managed this crisis well. Their MPC is up.
Yeah.
Up.
Yes. So they increased their repo by 50 basis points, which is what a lot of countries doing. So we also noticed that, of course, they're doing a great deal of work with fertilizer. Now, fertilizer is expensive to countries like us, you know, because getting it all the way, of course, Ukraine is tied, and getting it from Russia is difficult, and some other countries. But India is getting it between 10 and 25% discount from Russia. So they have a lot of fertilizer to handle at this time.
To use, shall we say.
Play with is the word, you know. But I mean, in spite of all of that, they still have the issues of inflation and food prices. And, you know, India, their population is really much. So they do have a lot of mouths to feed. And remember the scenario with the oil that we talked about.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not the government that is buying most of those cheap oil. It's the retailers, the corporates, some individuals that have been smart enough to place themselves strategically, and they're able to buy those cheap oil. Meanwhile, the state oil companies cannot, because they do have their limits. You know the way government stuff is,
of course,
bureaucracy
they have,
and stuff like that.
They have limits, not just in other things, in storage. I mean, you're looking at
exactly.
we should be seeing some visuals of storage tanks in a couple of
you know,
seconds.
so they've not been able to make. So a lot of times when we do hear that Indian is buying cheap fertilizer, cheap oil, is mostly the corporates, not the states that is doing it, and they buy it and then they sell it expensive outside the country. You know, sometimes even depriving local demands.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. I mean, they're in business, so it's what pays them.
Exactly.
Basically.
Government is in business to take care of the people. The private sector is in business to make money. So
now let's look at our own markets. I know that last week at this time, when I was talking to Ladi about it, Ladi said, oh, all the hopes were that it would start off on a positive trajectory and maintain that trajectory throughout the week. It didn't quite happen like that.
No. It just came on Friday. You know, so I discussed with some of those market analysts. I mean, what's going on? The other Friday, we did see that it was all bearish all through the week. And then on Friday, the bull showed up. And they said, well, let's not get our hopes up. It's not over yet. It's just, for instance, the other Friday was the end of the month. You know, so there are books to be put together, and then some investors just see the opportunity and get into the market. And that's probably what happened also last week, Friday. So we're still in a red market. The equities are still down. The fixed income space is even worse now. It's really, really quiet. You know, we're expecting that FAC, you know, allocation will stream into there and see some investors make use of the yield. But it's been really, really quiet in the fixed income, worse in the fixed income. In the equities, we still see some movement, maybe like banking stocks, you know, oil and gas. And, you know, there's also something, when you talk to Juliana, you know, from the UK and all of that, we hear of windfall tax because the oil companies there are making money at this time because of the surge in oil prices. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, Seplat, as even a local oil company, is not making that much money. You know, of course, we go back to the issue of thefts, oil thefts and vandalism, and it's also reflecting in the markets, you know, and, you know, at least it's supposed to be a time when we can see a little bit of green in some places, but we're not seeing that.
And if we're to project from what you've told, what you've said so far, we're looking at a situation where for much of the week it might be red, and then the bull might show up on Friday. So now people listening to you may just decide to wait and say, well, I'm not participating in this if he says it's going to happen on Friday. So.
Okay, I'm not saying nothing. I'm not saying nothing. But, you know, the case with Nigeria is kind of complicated because we do have the politics, the elections coming up. And that has also brought a lot of disruption to the economy scene. You know, there's the issue with the FX, which the CBN governor has said that a lot of people in the political scene are using FX as a way of moving cash easily and all of that. But there's a whole lot of uncertainty, you know, in the economic space because of politics. Who is going to come on next? What way or what policies will the person come with? You know, and so because of that, a lot of investors are just waiting and watching to see, oh, with the issue of insecurity, will the government be able to curb it? You know, will it affect the election or not? You know, so there's a lot
great
of
deal
uncertainty.
Exactly.
Yes, so investors are also looking at, in fact, some people say there won't be stability until after the elections next year, and we're going to see a lot of dips and ups and downs, but more of downs until after the election, when everything is kind of settled and people see clearly, investors especially see clearly which way the country is going, or the possibility, you know, that they see, and then they'll know which way to go.
So before I let you go, I then want to just ask, what should people be looking out for when they play in the market, in both the fixed income market and the stock market? Before now, we have watched as the international markets in America, in Asia, and so on, had gone through this.
Yes.
They too had gone through a great period of uncertainty.
Yes.
The grain deal seems to have introduced some level of stability because it is holding, contrary to most expectations. And then you now have some kind of quietude across a lot of markets.
Yes. Even
So
in the US,
we're having delayed reaction, is it? Are we having
we always have delayed reactions. We always have delayed reaction. But the thing is, you know, with the markets especially, it's not a quick fix. It's actually something you do and then wait and watch for the corporate parameters and all of that. Like, we have a lot of financial statement being released now. I mean, investors or potential investors can go through those financial statements to know the stance of the companies. Some companies are even reporting loss because that's the reality. I mean, we saw flour mill last week because they are heavily dependent on wheat and the supply disruption has disturbed them. So it's the reality. So it's a thing that investors have to follow the market, follow those corporates they're interested in, and be patient. It's not actually what you go in and come out at this time. As you said, in Nigerian market, we see delayed reaction, but we should see the impact of the grain that is leaving Ukraine at this time. We should get the impact in a couple of maybe weeks or so. We should feel it, and hopefully, you know, they say anything that goes up in Nigeria doesn't go down. We pray that's not the case.
With this issue of food and feed.
Exactly.
We'll have to wait and see. Well, a lot of people are keeping an eye on that. But as always, thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
There'll be updates on all of these stories and more after this program on Business Morning and later on in the day on Business Incorporated. Ini and, of course, Ladi Williams will be around to unpack it all, both nationally and internationally. Thank you. After the break, Russian player Daria Kasatkina wins first title at the Mubadala Silicon Valley Classic. Join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The head of Amnesty International's Ukrainian branch is leaving the human rights body after the group accused Ukraine's armed forces of endangering civilians by basing troops in residential areas during the Russian invasion. Oksana Pokalchuk, National Amnesty leader, said that the Ukrainian office has consistently noted that the information that Amnesty issued on August the 4th should take into account the position of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. Ms. Pokalchuk said as a result of this, unwittingly, the organization created material that sounded like support for Russia's narrative. In an effort to protect civilians, this study has become a tool of Russian propaganda. Amnesty made the comments last week Thursday, and Kiev likened it to Russian propaganda and disinformation. President Volodymyr Zelensky accused the group of abating what he called Russia's unprovoked attacks on Ukraine. The human rights group, he said, was trying to shift the responsibility from the aggressor to the victim. And Amnesty International has now issued an apology for the consternation triggered by its recent report, which, among other things, accused the Ukrainian armed forces of violating international humanitarian law and endangering civilians. The organization has, however, refused to disavow its findings. Amnesty said that it deeply regrets the distress and anger that our press release on the Ukrainian military's fighting tactics have caused. The rights group went on to explain that its sole objective in publishing the analysis was to ensure that civilians are protected. Amnesty insisted that its observers had cited Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of residential areas in at least 19 towns and villages across the country. According to Amnesty, by positioning its forces in such a manner, the Ukrainian military endangered the civilian population there by subjecting them to the danger of incoming Russian fire. The rights group added that nothing we documented Ukrainian forces doing in any way justifies Russian violations. While lambasting Russian forces, the investigation also took aim at the Ukrainian military, claiming that it had displayed a troubling pattern of putting civilians at risk and violating the laws of war by operating from residential infrastructure, including schools. Hollywood actress and producer Jessica Chastain met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his Chief of Staff Andriy Yermak in Kiev. Chastain, who arrived by train, was met by an official Ukrainian delegation at Kiev's main train station. During the meeting, President Zelensky thanked the actress for visiting, as she praised the people of Ukraine for being very brave and strong. According to the Ukrainian media, Chastain was also expected to visit Okmandy Children's Hospital in Kiev, as well as Irpin, a satellite town outside the capital, badly damaged after Russia launched its assault on Ukraine in February. And Pope Francis has said the departure from Ukrainian ports of ships loaded with grain was a, quote, sign of hope. He said, "My heartfelt hope is that by following this path, it will be possible to put an end to the fighting and reach a lasting peace." Ukrainian and Turkish officials said more ships carrying Ukrainian foodstuff sailed from Ukrainian Black Sea ports yesterday as part of a deal to unblock the country's sea exports. The 4 bulk carriers were loaded with almost 170,000 tons of corn and other foodstuff. Queued for water in the southern frontline city of Mykolaiv before an unusually long curfew was set to begin. The region's governor said on Telegram that the long curfew from late Friday to this morning aims to catch people collaborating with Russia. Mykolaiv, which has been shelled throughout Russia's invasion, lies close to Russian-occupied parts of the strategically important region of Kherson, where Ukraine plans to conduct a counter-offensive. Eyewitness video showed a crowd gathered to collect water, which had been transported from Odessa by a group of volunteers. Vitaly Kim, governor of the Mykolaiv region, told residents the curfew running from 11 on Friday to 5 this morning did not mean the city was under threat or facing a looming attack. Bells tolled in Hiroshima over the weekend as the city marked the 77th anniversary of the world's first atomic bombing, with officials, including the United Nations Secretary General, warning of a new arms race following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres joined the thousands packed into the Peace Park in the center of the city to mark the anniversary of the bombing that killed 140,000 people before the end of 1945. Mr. Guterres said almost 13,000 nuclear weapons are held in arsenals around the world, and crises with grave nuclear undertones are spreading fast from the Middle East to the Korean Peninsula to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who has chosen Hiroshima as the site of next year's Group of 7 summit, called on the world to abandon nuclear weapons. The Hiroshima catastrophe was followed by the U.S. military's atomic bombing of Nagasaki on August the 9th, which instantly killed more than 75,000 people. Japan surrendered 6 days later, ending World War II. Belarusian tennis player Victoria Azarenka will not play in the WTA 1000 tournament in Toronto next week after her visa application was rejected. Azarenka, who is ranked 20th in the world, also missed Wimbledon in June due to a ban on Belarusian players. The 2-time Grand Slam champion, however, added she will be playing in Western and Southern Open circuits in Cincinnati later on in August. The tennis governing bodies have banned Russia and Belarus from international competitions following the invasion of Ukraine, but individual players from the two countries are allowed to compete as neutrals. Meanwhile, Russian player Daria Kasatkina has won her first title of the season at the Mubadala Silicon Valley Classic. Kasatkina recovered from a set down to defeat American Shelby Rogers 6-7, 6-1, 6-2 in the championship decider. She finished the match with 24 winners to 32 unforced errors, while her opponent hit 27 winners to 39 unforced errors. With her latest win, the 25-year-old has returned to the top 10 as world number 9 in the WTA rankings for the first time since 2019. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeredoluwale. There'll be updates within the world today at 5 o'clock. But for now, do have a pleasant Monday and a good week ahead.